It is, or it was, a chicken heart.
Chicken heart? Are you crazy, man?
Chicken heart! Yes, chicken heart, I tell you. Chicken heart! Listen to me, you fools! Listen!
All right, boys, let's swing it.
Chicken Heart Productions presents a podcast in black and white. I am John Grisolano.
Mary Moe, or Mary Grisolano.
I'm Vicki Smith.
I'm Julie Grisolano.
I'm Jim Grisolano.
I'm Jenny Grisolano.
I'm Holly Hughes.
I'm Tony Grisolano.
We are here this week to talk about Roberta. Before we get into the film, this is our mandatory spoiler alert.
Go get him, Chicken Heart. Go get him.
We talk about old movies in this podcast. Fair warning, if you don't want to know what's going to happen, turn off now. Otherwise, we hand this over to Jenny. She chose this movie. Jenny, why don't you tell us why you picked this movie and tell us something about it.
Well, I chose this movie because I like musicals, and I remember this one from when I was a little girl, and I knew that it was one of my dad's favorites. So I thought I would try it out, see it again as an adult, and see what I thought. This movie, Roberta, was originally a book called Gowns by Roberta by Alice Deu Miller, and I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce her name right. And it was made into a musical for the stage in 1933, and then this film was made in 1935. And it stars Irene Dunne, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and Randolph Scott. It is best known for some of its very popular songs, like I Won't Dance, which was not originally in the Broadway show and was added for the film, as well as Lovely to Look At, which was nominated for an Academy Award and was also put in just for the film and not in the Broadway show. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is probably one of the most well-known songs in this movie. It's another reason why I really like this movie, because it's got so many good songs in it. And at the time, this movie was a big hit, apparently, and it had a net profit of more than $750,000.
What studio put this out?
It's a film by RKO.
I have William Sider as the director. And Jerome Kern, this is his music.
Music by Jerome Kern.
Yes.
Which is funny because there's a few of those songs, Lovely to Look At and I Won't Dance, that I used to think were Cole Porter, but they're not.
They're not. They're Kern. And originally I Won't Dance was from a flop of Kern's called Three Sisters.
It's funny you didn't mention the one I like near the beginning, which is the I'll Be Hard to Handle, the little number that Ginger Rogers sings. Probably my favorite piece in this movie.
I'll be hard to handle, I'm making it plain. Now just be a dear and scram out of here, cause I'm going to raise Cain.
I found that song was quite difficult because the accent she's putting on really obscures a lot of the lyrics.
Yes.
I agree, her accent ruined that song for me a little bit. The words were very cute, I thought.
I'm as cold as any shellfish. I tell lies, I mean I'm selfish. Think it over. My warning is, if you want to be sweet.
But I loved the dance scene after it. It seemed very spontaneous. I thought it was great.
Tony.
The songs went too fast for me. I couldn't really understand the lyrics.
I think we'll come back to that because I watched this with Tony, and if you can't tell the listening audience, Tony is, how old are you?
9.
Tony's 9. Now Tony likes old movies, so I let Tony watch the movie with me. And I thought it would be interesting to get a child's perspective because he's liked a lot of the films I've watched with him. And he did have some interesting comments. So normally we go through the plot as well. So we talk about the plot. This being a musical, I suppose the plot is pretty weak, but let's go through the story.
The story starts out with Fred Astaire, who is Huckleberry Haynes, and Randolph Scott, who is John Kent. And they arrive in Paris for a gig, and they find out that their new boss, or prospective boss, did not intend to have them. He was expecting Native Americans.
He was expecting the Indians, not the Indianaans.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so he does not want to work with them and says, nope, I take it back, go back to wherever you're from. And they even put on a little skit for him, which,
while very original, is not their best number. When they play later on, they're really good. And the skit that they decide that they're going to audition to desperately try and get a gig so that they can afford to return to America is basically like a college barbershop number.
so we didn't quite understand why they chose that
I've decided
number.
that it's because they couldn't get their
those were-
instruments out quickly enough.
And those people, the ones that were in that skit, those were radio personalities at the time. They used to do on the radio. There was no TV. The only medium that existed, for the general public was radio. So those people were doing the skits, the type of skits that you would hear on the radio, and this was putting a face, the action was these guys doing their music and with the voices and stuff. And a lot of times they brought the radio people into the movie so that the people would get to see who the characters were in real life.
I think it was kind of weird.
You thought the guy with the deep voice. You
Yeah,
had. You had.
he was weird. He had that really high girly voice, and at different points he had
Yeah, he was enthralled with that. He was.
to be a king, a falling that I fell, kissing never tell, falling and
Farewell.
which is going to be might have been. Let's begin.
Ollie and I were sitting there going, why is this what they would decide to do?
See, I took it as that's all they could do on an improv
Me too.
real quick.
That's what
All right.
That's the way
that's
I
how they
took
worked.
it.
That's how they worked it into the show.
Yeah.
But the characters, most likely radio personalities at the time, and RKO was RKO Radio. Okay, so RKO Movies was owned or run by RKO Radio. Okay,
So kind of like an early cameo in the way that big movie stars
Exactly.
also cameos in smaller films now.
Exactly.
From there, they do not get the gig. Randolph Scott and Fred Astaire are trying to figure out what to do. Huckleberry Haynes says, well, I know someone, Lizzie Gatz or Liz Gatz, or that he didn't know where to find her.
It took him a little bit to figure out. Right?
Yes. And Randolph Scott said, well, I have my Aunt Minnie, and she runs this very famous gown shop, and so they're going to go visit Aunt Minnie.
And her public name is Roberta.
I think that skit was one of that part where they were on the train was one of the best because you actually get because they don't talk so fast and they don't sing so fast and they don't do all that so fast.
What was your complaint throughout the movie? What did you think?
It's way too fast.
I thought a lot of the fast talking bits were quite funny.
Especially because it's between Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
Yes, I was going to get to that when we finally do
Yeah,
that.
adorable.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the problems of radio. You had you had short shows, 15-minute to 30-minute shows, so people got used to talking fast. The shows were always talk fast.
That was my biggest complaint throughout the whole movie.
I was just gonna say I was sort of hazy on Randolph Scott's relationship to the band.
band.
Yes.
I
was thinking about that because he was supposed to be a football player who was well known as a football player, and somehow he's managing this band.
Yes.
But he makes a comment
But he
later on
never
saying,
does
"Oh, I
any
can't wait to
managing,
go
no.
home."
Yeah, he's
to
the guy
coach
of a
his
football team to coach. Yeah.
Yeah, because at first, to me, it seemed very clear cut that he was their manager, and then it wasn't until about halfway through the film when they start talking about him playing football and being a football star and his football team to coach them. Wait, what? I
And
thought
other
he
than
was
the-
their manager.
Other than the first few scenes, he never goes back to doing anything with the band again. Except for looping them into when he takes over the dress shop.
What I almost felt was that it was two films that were pushed together, or two storylines. Almost like in the old film where they go, well, we've got a story, but we don't have a vehicle for it. Well, Fred and Ginger were their vehicle. So they then kind of shoehorned the band so that they could put musical numbers in. And they shoehorned in, Fred and Ginger's thing and just conglomerated this story about an all-American guy who goes to Paris with a band so they get to do the big American musical.
An interesting note to that is Irene Dunn is the headliner in this movie. This is her vehicle. It's not really a Fred and Ginger because this is their
She
third
gets top
movie.
billing, yeah.
She gets top billing as Irene Dunn. They're not quite Fred and Ginger by this point.
No, you're right.
This is their third movie, and in their early films, they're second to
Yeah.
other people.
Yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I believe in, like, when you're watching the beginning, the opening credits, that they have 3 names before the title, and it's Irene Dunn, Fred Astaire, and Ginger Rogers.
They are,
And
but
then
they're
Randolph
not
Scott
the
is
top.
after.
They're not the top.
No,
and you're
she
right.
is.
And
She
Randolph
is.
Scott is the 4th.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the
But you're right,
4th
Irene
name. He
Dunn
gets
is.
the 2nd page.
They get to Aunt Minnie's, and Aunt Minnie, when we first meet her, she's talking to
Lord Weatherby or something like that.
Even though the movie's sort of named after her, she's not a big important role. You
No,
could have the movie
Roberta.
without her.
She's not important except for the fact that her business is named Roberta's.
Roberta.
Or Roberta. And so what's important is that when she passes away, they have to deal with managing the business. And that's what brings everybody together, right?
Right.
Well,
Is
that's also
the dress
another
shop.
question I have regarding, I thought a faulty, maybe I'm getting too far ahead, is why name it Roberta's? So her name's Aunt Minnie.
Because Minnie
And she's-
is,
I don't know.
Minnie isn't as, it's a very American name, whereas Roberta, if you're trying to settle in Paris, it sounds a little bit more posh, it sounds a little bit more grand,
Yeah.
whereas Minnie is, the mouse.
Right.
Just like why
Something you have to remember, back at this time, in the 20s and 30s, storyline wasn't necessarily supposed to make a whole heck of a lot of sense. It was the vehicle to get the songs in.
Yeah.
Okay, starting in the 40s, Oklahoma, Carousel, storyline started
book
to have,
became important.
there should be a plot
Yeah.
and the music should enhance the plot. Before that, Showboat and a lot of the Broadway shows and the movies, the storyline didn't have to make sense. So if he was a Newfoundland fullback, it didn't, was he the manager? That's
Now,
insignificant.
interestingly enough, even though there were some minor holes in the story, I did find this for a musical to have a pretty decent story
Right.
arc.
That's
Right.
Well, that
you
was
get a
actually
break.
something that Fred Astaire made a point of. They say it's like one of his things that he was well known for his films, was that he tried to utilize his songs to actually be a vehicle with which to further the story and to actually be assimilated into the story, and not like a Bubsy Berkeley, like random, just out of the blue, a song pops up. He was very
A
intentional.
Gene Kelly 20-minute
Yes,
dance
he had two
sequence,
things. He
dream
wanted the
dance
camera
sequence.
angles on him at all times, not like a high Bubsy Berkeley, like look down, shoot just the leg, shoot just the face. He wanted like full body shots.
And you definitely see that.
And he also wanted the storyline to flow, like the songs to flow into and make sense. Hence the great number that John loves in the beginning, because it actually makes sense. Like it's a very natural dance.
Maybe even more importantly, we're introduced to Minnie's assistant, Stephanie, who is played by Irene Dunn. And from the beginning, it is evident that she is nobility of some sort. Don't exactly know what, or at least I didn't pick up on it at that early scene, but she's nobility.
When that character comes in, this is when all the lovey-dovey stuff starts.
Well, Randolph Scott's character, John and Stephanie, have a flirtation immediately, instantaneously.
Yes, and the cute skit that Holly and I talked about that we liked was him trying to open the doors for her, but her opening all the doors herself before he can open them for her. That bit I liked.
Says a lot about both their
After
characters.
about the third time of him saying, "Gee, that's swell," I wanted to start counting how many times he said "swell." I didn't, but it was something.
Drink responsibly, but it would make a very good drinking game.
He said, gee, that's swell, the whole movie,
He
to
did.
everything, even when he tries to act classy.
Aunt Minnie and John, that's his character's name, get along very well, and she's very happy to see him.
He's there because he needs to find work for his band.
Yes, and she is going to help them.
And she describes him, and he ends up describing himself, I think, pretty accurately in this
Right.
little exchange.
What kind of dog does she say? he is?
Newfoundland puppy.
A Newfoundland puppy.
He talks about his ex-girlfriend complaining that he just wants, what was it, meat
and potatoes.
potatoes and pie. This guy is your corn-fed, golly gee, shucks, aw, that's
Gee,
swell.
that's swell.
Yeah, he must, and it's true, he must say that a dozen times in the movie. He's just...
The all-American hero.
Yes, and
All-American
he is granite-jawed, giant shoulders, and I much prefer him in westerns as he gets older. But my reaction to him was the same as yours of Ralph Bellamy in His Girl Friday.
Uh-huh.
I was just so sick of this guy. He was so
A sap.
righteously
Just a sap.
sappy.
Yeah.
Like, oh my, down home.
He's
good.
handsome.
I like
Oh, he's very handsome. He's
I
very
think
handsome.
He's
but-
the only character whose character arc makes him worse. Like, he starts out as quite a nice, not very bright, but quite a nice, friendly guy. And by the end, he is just a jerk. And by the end, I just wanted to say, no, I'm going to go and marry somebody who appreciates me.
Yeah, and other than the fact that he's good looking, I'm not really sure what some classy princess from Russia who designs her own clothes and is an independent woman sees in a guy who can't string together barely comprehensive sentence.
I think you're being kind of hard on Randall Scott. I mean, but he is handsome, and his character is not very fully fleshed out, we'll say. But there are some scenes where you kind of get the impression that they're trying to make him be this honest, down-to-earth, wholesome guy that can be attractive to maybe somebody who's living in sophisticated Paris and is tired of sophisticated quote-unquote men.
After the aunt dies and they take over the dress shop and they have 1 or 2 scenes where they run it together, she seems really moved or thrilled when he wants to, after she disagrees with him for a moment, when he wants to cut the dress that scoops down in the back because he basically finds it indecent. That really seems to touch her in a surprising way.
I think
also,
she thinks he's classy, and he says
Yeah.
it's vulgar. He keeps saying it's vulgar, it's vulgar. It's like,
right, and I think that's, to your point, Vicky, I think that's exactly this type of scenes that it seems clear, and the way Irene Dunn plays that part, that this stands out to her as, oh my gosh.
Refreshing.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
refreshing. Men don't seem to respect women or
I have major issues with that. My issue with the whole dress thing
uh,
is simply that they're almost playing it. Women like the low-cut dresses because it empowers them and it's the future of women, and that men don't. Men hate it when women expose flesh because it's shocking and it's vulgar and it's hideous, and no man would want to see a woman wearing a low-cut dress. And I don't know if that was either deliberate naivety or the filmmakers trying to say, let's return to good old values where women wore something that looked like a burqa or whatever else. It just came across as he was going, what? No woman of mine is going to wear something that reveals herself. How dare you? Go back to the kitchen, you. Stop making these dresses. I found
go
it
back to the
really
kitchen.
objectionable.
Wow, okay, so I disagree with that.
I do
because
too.
they come back to it later when his inexplicably the woman he's still in love with, right? I don't think the filmmakers are telling the story of men don't like dresses like this, let's return to good old-fashioned values. I think they're saying Randolph Scott's
Yes.
character, John, is
Uptight.
Don't you think this dress does something for me?
It'll do something for me.
Oh, now, Huck.
uptight or wholesome.
There's also the scene where they're talking to that newspaper reporter, and I think they're sort of, I mean, this scene is kind of making fun of his viewpoints, you know, like, I don't think that his...
What does the reporter write in her notebook?
They're both crazy.
And they don't know what they're talking about.
No, they
They have no idea.
I
what
love
they're
that
talking
scene though, because pockets and dresses, so, you know, would eliminate men's bulging pockets. That was so funny. I really like that.
I really think that some of this stuff would help.
Yes, Tony.
No! You are not the only couturier in Paris. I am a good advertising for the house that dresses me. I do not know why I come to Roberta anyway. I understand why you want to push me like that. You big, beautiful American.
Soon after this, we get introduced to Ginger Rogers' character, who goes by multiple names. She is Liz Gatz, but she is also
Countess.
the Count.
Tenka?
Yeah.
And yes, she's Tenka.
I promise to get you a job if you won't tell on me.
Okay, Liz.
And it's not Liz.
Sorry, Princess, Baroness, what is it?
You may call me Tanka.
Tanka.
You're welcome.
about. Which is all an act. It's all
Yes,
fake.
it's all an act. She's at Roberta's.
She has a terrible, presumably Polish accent. She's supposed to be Polish royalty.
Polish.
Oh, is that
Yes.
what she was supposed to
She's
be?
supposed to be
Yes.
a Polish countess. Yeah.
Yes, she's a
It's
Polish countess
atrocious
because in order to get ahead in Paris, you have to have a gimmick and an act. And hers is to have the
Is to be
title
a
of countess.
Polish,
Yeah,
yeah.
to be a Polish princess.
Aristocrat.
Yes. So
And she's acting like a nutter.
Right, and she's acting nuts at Roberta's. And she and Stephanie have a bit of a confrontation, and then she and Randolph Scott have a confrontation because he gets very protective of Stephanie. Aunt Minnie wants to hear them play. And so
Randolph Scott rushes outside and he tells them to strike up the band and start playing.
Strike it up. It's a job.
She's looking down at them and seems to recognize Fred Astaire,
Who does recognize her?
who recognizes her. And he comes inside and they are introduced to one another, and she's introduced to him as the Countess, and he tries to greet her as Liz. And this is when we realize that she is Liz Gatz, and when she and Fred Astaire are alone together, you find out she's
And they have a
just
nice little
American.
exchange,
And they have a very humorous exchange.
which Tony thought was too fast and didn't understand.
Yes.
May I present myself, Le Marquis de Indiana.
Yeah,
I
thought
didn't
they were
understand
funny.
half the movie.
They have such a great. I mean, when you watch these movies, you understand why they're Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
Yes,
right?
they have great chemistry.
They
Yeah.
have fantastic chemistry.
They were my, I mean, to jump ahead a lot, I just want to say, I mean, they were my favorite part of their dialogue in this scene and in every scene they were in was very witty and clever and a lot of fun.
And their dancing, I have to harken back to something Vicky said earlier, which is their first dance number that you see. I mean, it really does. That's the most
That's my
natural
favorite part of
dancing
the
you'll
movie.
ever.
Yeah.
That was my favorite.
That's just
part.
incredible.
He explains to her their woes and troubles, and she says, well, I work for a guy, and we're looking for a band, and I'll get you in with our club. So
If you
she's
don't
gonna-
tell my secret.
If you don't tell my secret. So she's going to help him out, and Fred Astaire keeps referring to her as the Countess.
So they get a job at the Café Russe.
We have Ginger Rogers' song that Tony said he couldn't understand the lyrics
I'm
of,
with
and
John.
it's one of
I
John's favorite.
loved it. It was without the accent. If I weren't tone deaf, that would be a song.
I didn't like the accent, but it was still my favorite
I
song.
do
It was very
too. I
clever,
like
and I
it.
thought
I'll be cuddle candle. I promise you that. And if you complain, here's one little Jane that will leave you flat.
Ginger Rogers, she's a beautiful woman, and
Yeah.
she's beautiful in this. It's got a lot of personality.
And she also works as a really good foil for Irene Dunne, who is much more like the traditional actress. And,
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
very beautiful, very flawless, whereas Ginger Rogers is like almost tomboyish, while still being very elegant, very feminine.
Yeah.
She has that real almost bromance thing as well as romance
Yeah.
with Fred Astaire's character.
That's a
and
great point,
It's
yeah.
a really good foil to have the two running alongside each other, so you get that really elegant, refined, restrained, I can't talk about what I'm feeling, and then the chick that gets up and says, well, I'm gonna be fun, but I'm worth it.
Right.
That's so funny
Right.
that you say they have a bromance, because there was one scene that actually struck me. It was during the song before she's starting. Fred Astaire turns and like looks over his shoulder, and it was the most natural like grin and smile as she's about to start her number. Like he's so excited, and I was like, oh my god, I've never noticed it before. And it was like one of those things like you can't act that. That just looked like such a genuine like I like this person. She's about to start into her number. And like just the repertoire.
I think that was acted.
This is something I noticed in the movie, is that she was, when the movie started, the big, famous star. And yet, when he came on board, it was all about him, and she was almost a secondary role in every scene, dance scene, song scene that they did.
In real life, she actually used to fight with some of the directors, like in the Fred and Ginger things. Not that she didn't like Fred Astaire, but she would actually have to fight for tooth and nail for every little thing that she would get, because he would always get first billing. He actually would get a cut of the film, which was like totally unheard of back in the day. And so that it was just very difficult for her, like professionally speaking. She would just like want to, like she'd have to keep fighting to get everything she wanted.
You mentioned Fred Astaire's not a good actor, and you
He's not.
said it in passing. I actually thought his comedic timing was pretty good. I thought he's a decent comic actor, like with some of his lines. I thought that, like some of the stuff between him and Rogers and stuff was okay.
I don't think he's a. I was going to say that. I think that with Ginger Rogers, I think she makes him look good. I think
Okay.
I mean, I think that they play really well with each other, but if you watch him in other movies, I always find him charming, and it doesn't really matter that his acting skill is not top notch. To me, I enjoy his movies, but I think with Ginger Rogers that she makes him shine.
The way I always refer to it is that she gives him looks and he gives her style. It's like, her being good looking enhances his looks, which weren't too good. And his being stylish, because if you see some of the early
His being
Rogers
classy,
stuff,
yeah.
before she had her teeth fixed, she had bad teeth, and she came across as the wisecracking personalities, and he gave her style.
It's almost like having that backstory. It's almost the antithesis of what actually happens in the films. The idea is when they knew each other, she was the wisecracking broad, and they were almost like a double act, and yet she's gone off to Paris and become this personality. And so it's almost like a tongue-in-cheek kind of reference to that.
Still got my bucket here, and I'm trying to save the Titanic while it's sinking with my little bucket. And the Titanic being Fred Astaire not being a good actor, I do want to just say he's natural, and I think that is something. I'm not surprised he never won an Academy Award, but he has a natural charm about him.
Oh yeah,
I think he's charming.
That's
But look, if you look,
range.
if you look at the films
I'm
around
with
the
you
time,
there.
when you look at people like Humphrey Bogart, who were all very serious actors and stuff like that, I almost felt that that film, that Roberta, is one of the most modern, characteristic-wise, aside from Randolph Scott, is a very modern acting. It does seem natural.
Yeah.
But it almost looks out of place.
So that was a rehearsal number. The little number I like, and I agree, I don't like her little accent, but they're at rehearsal afterwards. It's Fred Astaire and Ginger are doing rehearsal, and it seems a very natural little number. It's just a very fluid. They seem very comfortable. They seem very comfortable with each other. They like each other.
Yeah.
They rehearsed the heck out of this stuff. I mean, they worked very hard, but it comes across as effortlessly breezing through it, having a good time.
Yep.
And it's very pleasant to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It seems like they just did that out of their mind. They just thought of a song and did it.
It's not like the whole Bob Fosse thing where you're sitting there going, wow, they spent 40 hours, a day, doing this dance sequence over and over again.
Right. It is amazing how physically they just seem to fit so well
They
together.
danced together, as compared to one accompanying the other. Danced together.
Which is very rare in a partner with Fred Astaire, especially because he normally, in other roles I've seen him in without Ginger Rogers, I feel like he normally outshines in Dancing With, and she is just about the only partner I've
They
seen.
complemented each other.
Yes.
They did.
It's like when you see Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. It's like they're two dancers dancing against each other. It's it's like a competition. Who's better? And that's why that was always what I thought was so great about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
I won't dance, why should I? I won't dance, how could I? I won't dance, merci beaucoup.
So some of the high points are Aunt Minnie dying.
That's a high
Tony's
point.
making choking gestures here
Yes.
for Aunt Minnie dying.
Yeah, Aunt Minnie dies and leaves her business. No, she does not leave her business. She has no will that they can find.
She dies intestate.
Yes. And so John is given the business because he's her closest living relative. And this is kind of a shock to everyone because Stephanie is the one who's really been doing most of the designs. And everyone thought she was going to get the business and it's what Aunt Minnie wanted. So eventually, after some talks, they come to an agreement that they're going to be partners because he doesn't want this business, but she refuses to take it just as a gift.
I got the impression that it wasn't just that either, that she was going, I'm only going to do it if you're sticking around because you're what I want to stay in Paris for, not this business and my independence. It was much more a case of, I can get this guy to stay in Paris, I can get him to fall in love with me, but I need a way of anchoring him.
See, I didn't get that.
Really?
There was a moment where when Fred Astaire says, "Why don't you do it together?" There was a close-up of her where she kind of like, where you can see her wheels turning, and that's when I thought I had a similar impression.
Yeah.
Oh.
I had a different impression altogether. I thought that she was too sort of independent to just accept a gift from a guy that she just met, and she wanted the business, and she could maybe convince herself that it's okay if they shared it as partners, and that was more what I got from it.
This scene is the saddest scene in the movie and the most romantic because that's when they start falling in love and also this is when she dies, so it's sad.
Quite impressed by the gravity and the way they dealt with Aunt Minnie's death, especially in that kind of movie, to have something that's genuinely very emotional without it being like a clangor and seeming really out of place. I think they did that really well and yet recovered from it really well without it being crass.
We were commenting on how they dim the lights, like all of a sudden they're singing and it gets dark outside, and Mary made the comment, Aunt Minnie's gonna die.
Irene Dunn's character, Stephanie, has been singing to Aunt Minnie, singing her to sleep because it helps Aunt Minnie to sleep, and she's obviously ill. This was Irene Dunn singing.
That really was her.
This is Irene Dunn. She sings, so far as I know, the whole movie.
This is because she grew up very musically. Her mother had her learn piano, and she got a scholarship to the Chicago Musical College. And she was a mezzo-soprano, and she wanted to become an opera singer, but she didn't pass the Metropolitan Opera Company audition. But this sort of led into my initial theory as to why the vibrato voice was so popular at this time and why all women in these musicals, including Irene Dunne, seems to have this vibrato, is because I think it was because they were all trained to be opera singers. That I don't think they had a lot. And I didn't do in-depth research into this, but I don't think that any other sort of style of music for singing, like vocally, was really trained.
I've never seen this film before. I had never heard Smoke Gets in Your Eyes sung as anything other than like jazzy, bluesy. And the vibrato drove me nuts. I've obviously got a beautiful voice, and I would love to hear her sing Vivaldi or Puccini or something like that. But singing these kind of songs, it almost felt like she was right up against the microphone. And so you couldn't really hear what she was doing because the sound was being distorted by when she was being recorded.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
it was such a shame because she's got a beautiful voice.
Yes.
They're beautiful songs, and it just sounded bad.
I agree.
But I think the vibrato, I think it was the training of the time period and the era, and that I don't think they really had other sorts of training apart from the operatic training. And I could be wrong. So that is Irene Dunne's History of Music. If you watch this movie, you will get to hear Irene Dunne's real voice. She was classically trained.
A lot of the actresses that were, sang in the movies were failed opera singers. Jeanette MacDonald, she couldn't cut it, on the opera stage. But they had excellent voices, but it's total different,
Well, there you go,
total
Dick.
quality.
You're backing up my theory that that's why all the women sang with that
Oh
vibrato.
no, that's true because you got to remember, sound was a relatively new thing here.
Yes.
Sound had only been around for a few years, so the people, before they were developing what's going to be a movie type personality singing, they took the people who were already trained to do this stuff. The actors, and if you were an opera star, you sure weren't going to be coming to make movies. There were a few, Lawrence Tippett and a few of the other ones, who were actually opera people who made movies, but they didn't necessarily translate into the movies.
That's been true even today. I mean, when Patrick Wilson did the Phantom of the Opera film, it was, even for a musical, it was still really unusual for someone to come from Broadway or someone who's classically trained to try and make it in the movies. And that's even true, when was that, like 10 years ago?
Yeah. Lawrence Tippett was a great one at that time. He was a Broadway type guy. He didn't translate to the movies. He didn't look good. If he would have looked like a John Barrymore and he had the voice, that would have been great, but he didn't. Weak chin. He just didn't look good. And that's why they had to try and find the people that could do both, look good and also perform well.
No, it's interesting. This is the first time we've really talked about Irene Dunne. We've been talking for like 40 minutes. And she's the star. But she doesn't really get to do anything very interesting.
I feel like she's almost in the wrong... Like I said before about them putting two films together, it's almost like she's in the wrong movie. Like this amazing, dramatic performance doesn't seem to fit in a light-hearted musical or in alongside Randolph Scott. I mean, one of my favourite moments between them is at the beginning, is that physical moment where he pulls her and Tanker apart, and just like, that is hilarious physical comedy, and just really taking advantage of his size and the rest of it. That's one of the only really humorous moments that Irene Dunne gets to play with in a very humorous movie.
Right.
And she was a very good comedian.
Yeah, and it was wasted. I feel like she was wasted so much.
They had to have a star, and you had to have somebody who could sing. And this was a vehicle, like I said, you could see that they were grooming Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers for bigger things, so you had to probably expand what they were doing to get them across, because I think that's one of those things, they were flagged as stars of the future.
They stole the show.
Most of these people from older movies have good voices, but the people now have terrible voices, but they look amazing, so they just put stuff on them that makes them sound good, like auto-tune and stuff.
Yeah, they didn't have auto-tune back then.
Now that that you got me going. What you gonna do? Is it up to me or is it up to you?
He does have a good point, that
Yeah.
it was more natural back then, and now they have a lot of, like...
Russell Crowe and Les Miserables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, plus too, you gotta remember these. I don't know what the time frame or the budget was, but I suspect that this film probably didn't take more than a month to make, and their budget was probably under $1 million. Now you've got the mixers and stuff. Movies take 3-4 months, and you can do one scene, of about 2 seconds, and it's like you cut and paste. Back then, you'd do a whole scene of 2 or 3 minutes.
One of the things I like about this, in most films of this era, is this is all real. In other words, Fred and Ginger aren't dancing in front of a CGI stage, and their clothes haven't been CGI'd on them because they're really just dancing in sweatsuits or something. It's like, no, she's really wearing an elegant gown, and he's really doing this furious tap dance in a tux in front of this elaborate orchestra, which is a real orchestra on a real stage. It's not a blue screen. The studios had all this talent, not just actors, but they had musicians and carpenters and tradespeople and other skilled people to come in and create these crafts and effects and all of this stuff on hand to put this stuff on, like you said, in probably a month.
Yeah.
Do this whole production in a month.
Well, anyway, the movies, they would make a half dozen movies a year, each of the stars. I mean, it was not uncommon to make 4, 5, 6, 7 movies a year. Now you make a star might make a movie every 2 years. This was all there was. There was no TV. You'd get a movie that'd be out for 2-3 months, and then expect a new one to come out. So I mean, your stars were turning out big movies, and so if you were turning them out quick, so it's like you didn't have the time to waste, and you'd get it 1 or 2 or 3 takes. That's it.
It's part of why you see the repeat sets.
Oh yeah.
You see a set that was used in one film, and you see another film, and you're going, that looks awfully familiar. We eventually get to meet John Kent's girlfriend, that's up in the air. Sophie.
Played by Claire Dodd is that actress. I just wanted to comment, Claire Dodd's another one of these wonderful character actors. I've commented in previous podcasts. One of the things I like about old movies is you had people, you still do today, but much more so in the past, studios had stables of actors who filled certain roles. If you had a role in a movie, a niche role, Claire Dodd had a nice little career for about 10 years, the woman who plays Sophie, playing characters kind of like she plays in this. Sort of scheming, conniving, not very nice.
Fun to watch, but vile enough that you sympathize with the heroine.
If this were a serious movie, she'd be a femme fatale, but these are all lighthearted usually. She made a nice career out of that, and you'll see her if you watch enough films. She made like 60 movies in her short career, and like many women of the time, when she got married, she quit.
And that was fine because again, if you could, these were Depression days, and if you could have an acting gig, and a regular gig, you were happy. And I mean, there were people who were just like that.
So we meet Sophie,
And she's not a nice person.
She is not nice, and she's not very nice to
And you know
John.
that from the very beginning. I mean, it's like that was never one of those things that where you're surprised.
No, you're not.
You know it coming in.
But you've got to appreciate a girl who goes across the ocean for a free dress.
Fred Astaire does not like Sophie. Fred Astaire has some great comedic moments
hysterical.
with Sophie, and he likes to tease her. When she decides she wants a dress, Fred Astaire comes up with a brilliant idea of showing her the dress that John Kent hated and said, we're discarding it, we're never going to show it
Too
because...
slinky.
Yes, it's inappropriate.
It's too revealing.
Now Stephanie doesn't agree with this. Stephanie does not want to show, she knows John Kent doesn't like this dress. She doesn't want to show it to John Kent's girlfriend. But Fred Astaire, he just wants to pull one over on Sophie.
And Stephanie pretty much goes along with it because Sophie is so vile, and she genuinely seems to love, Stephanie genuinely seems to love John. She doesn't want him to end up with this harpy.
Yes. So we end up seeing that Stephanie goes along with it. Sophie, of course, loves the dress, and she's going to impress John with it. And Fred Astaire has, up to this point, talked it up like, oh, John's going to be thrilled. And then we are at a club where, of course, Fred and Ginger are performing. Sophie is there, and Fred makes a bet with her. He sits down and he makes a bet and says, I bet that John's going to eat this dress.
Would that give you $100?
Yes, and they wager, and they lay it out on the table. John comes over and Sophie shows off her slinky dress, and John hates it, of course, and doesn't hide the fact that he does. She has a very, I find,
She's very direct.
humorous moment where we're done, we're through. She says, we're done, we're through. We're through.
And then
We're through up into his ear, and he's just sitting at the bar ignoring her. And a couple times she comes back to make sure that he's heard.
He's
that they're
supposed to
through.
be, he is supposed to be running after and saying, no, please, I'm so sorry, you're amazing, you're the best thing ever happened to you.
Every scene was reverse psychology. That was the only thing that worked in anybody in the movie. Did you notice that? You had to reverse, it was reverse psychology to get her to buy that dress. It was reverse psychology to convince Irene Dunn that she wanted to be partners. Through the whole thing, they used that bit
Ginger
to
Roger
convince
uses
people.
reverse psychology on Fred later.
I won't
We'll see
dance,
that.
don't ask me.
Yes.
Is reverse psychology.
John Kent gets drunk. He asks for 12 bourbons,
Brandies, in a
brandies,
row.
I'm sorry, brandies in a row. And
Which is a little bit of an overreaction for a dress.
Lovely to look at, delightful to know, and heaven to kiss. A combination like this
is quite my most impossible dream come true. Imagine finding a boy like you.
Stephanie appears, and she's in princess form. She even has a crown on, and she's looking very elegant and regal, and she comes in with the man who worked for Minnie, who is clearly her friend, and he's looking very princely, and yes, John Kent has no idea it's her cousin. 12 brandies later, John Kent is pretty drunk.
He hears some old biddies talking about, doesn't the princess look lovely? And he goes, oh god, she's married.
She's married the prince. She's in this little private room, and they ask her to sing, and she's singing When Smoke Gets in Your Eyes.
I love that song!
This was another really great scene, to be honest, because Irene Dunn's performance, despite the fact that I agree with her singing style is not my favorite, I actually think that her performance is really great.
Heartfelt.
Yes, very heartfelt. Like after they have that fight and she comes back in and tries to finish the song, you can hear her voice crack.
It's not until he goes and
Yes.
then she breaks. It's beautiful.
It really is a great scene in the movie where you can hear her voice crack, you can see the tears coming down, and I really feel for her.
And for anyone who maybe hasn't seen this film and is listening, what happens is that she sees John Kent sort of across the way, if you will, and they have a bit of a fight. And so it's after this fight that she carries on singing, but is struggling. And then, when he leaves, she just kind of collapses at the table and starts crying.
And stay tuned after the podcast while Jenny sings Smoke Gets in Your Eyes.
Of course, it's a misunderstanding, and after a very long fashion show put together thanks to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers' genius at roping Stephanie
with
back
Lucille
in.
Ball. Is that not Lucille Ball? Lucille Ball is one of the models. I think she is.
Well,
or at least she looks exactly like Lucille.
Maybe.
That scene is actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, that scene I had massive difficulty with. You do not put something that long-winded in right at the end of the denouement. It was just clanging, and I was going, no, I want to see Stephanie's big reuniting with John. I don't want to sit here watching
But two of the
dresses
are in that, right?
I completely agree that I thought it was too much to have like each model, like with each of the 18 dresses, do a turn, and or two turns or spins and then pause, and you're still on it. I'm like, this is so drawn out. I think it needs to be a little quicker. We get it. The dresses are beautiful. They're very elegant. You're right. They're trying to showcase some designer.
And especially bizarre for me because they show
one group of dresses, and then we have Irene Dunn singing Lovely to Look At, which is a song I really enjoy. But then we go back to the models, and I didn't quite understand why we had the random musical interlude.
Is this a 30s chick movie? You can imagine was a guy sitting there in 1935 looking at his watch like, is this over yet?
So at the end, we do get a pretty fantastic Fred and Ginger dance number, and Ginger, by the way, has the best dress out of all of them.
She does.
Yep,
She
by
does.
far.
It's beautiful.
Nonsense.
My favorite bit was with
You don't think Ginger's
at
got the
the
best?
No, Lucille Ball did.
I told you! I told you it was Lucille Ball! Her dress was pretty.
Ginger, as we were talking about sort of the reverse psychology, after the Fred and Ginger's big dance number, she collapses into a chair backstage
Proposes.
and basically proposes. Very subtly proposes to Fred, who...
She accepts his proposal.
Yes.
Fred and Ginger, I agree, they have great chemistry, they have a great rapport, they seem to like each other, they're friends. They're never very romantic.
No, they're
like
not.
even that they're gonna get married, and they shake hands. They don't kiss or throw their arms around each other. The Fred and Ginger relationships in these movies
Buddy.
tend to be more buddy. Yeah, they're
I
not
agree.
your
But you
typical
see the
romantic relationship.
But in the last scene is a dance with Fred and Ginger, and they are having it was a great dance. But even then, when you know that an idealistically romantic scene, they would have kissed and then it would have closed. They don't.
Right.
It's the same thing why I liked in Last Time with His Girl Friday. It's a similar relationship with Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant, and I always like those.
John Kent and Stephanie, Irene Dunn and Randolph Scott, they end up together. They have a cute little scene, and clearly I liked Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers more because I can't even be bothered to elaborate on John Kent and Stephanie getting together, but they do.
In the first half of the film, I think you and I would have been raving right now if but again, John just shoots himself in the foot the whole way through the film, and I just did not like him by the end.
I will absolutely give the first review. I thought the music was beautiful and the dancing was excellent. It was some of my favorite dance scenes that I think I've ever really seen in a film. Fred Astaire and Ginger were just on top. I also liked, this was something that I didn't really get to mention, but that I was sort of stating for this bit, how subtle these films are, taking on current events, and the idea of just vaguely touch on these sort of Russian immigrants, the Russian nobility that's settling throughout Europe because of the Russian Revolution. And it's just such a side thing that's kind of noted because Stephanie's a Russian princess, but I just really like how in these old movies they're able to touch on current events without bashing you over the head with it. But that is something that I've noticed in several of the films that we've watched, that there are these very topical issues that are just sort of woven in without them really forcing you to pay attention to them. And that was something else I appreciate about this film that I wouldn't even have thought about, except that I watched it for this podcast. Irene Dunn was very talented. I'd give it maybe 2.5 stars out of 5, and I would say it's worth a watch for Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
I think that I tend to be very judgmental of old films, especially old musicals. Whereas the Grizzolanos grew up watching all these really lavish set-piece musicals, I didn't. What I felt about this film, though, is that unlike most musicals, the only problem I had with it was the editing. I thought the acting was really good, really, again, as we've been saying, very natural, very heartfelt. But I think, especially from a modern perspective, the editing will irritate you. I think that, especially we've talked about the dress show at the end, there are just lots of moments where you're going, this is badly edited, why have you put this in? Why did you suddenly cut that scene there? And while at times, obviously, it works very well for things like Fred Astaire's dance sequences, which are all in one shot, and that, especially if you compare it to modern films, is very impressive. You can tell that he just did that, and however many takes it took, it is in one shot. Things like that are very, very impressive, but I think that from a modern point of view, you'll be sitting there going, well, there's not enough of that storyline, there's too much, do we really need another musical number here? But it is very dated in some ways, but in other ways, a very modern film and very enjoyable. Just have the bleeper ready with you, the remote control ready, to fast forward the damn dress sequences.
I think I hate it. I couldn't understand half the movie. I was saying, can you please replay that? I don't get it. The singing was meh. And the dress sequence, looking at the clock the whole time going, oh my god, there's 5 more minutes left in the movie. Is it going to be a whole dress sequence? I would give it 1 out of 5 stars.
I might have the kindest review of this movie, and I actually found myself snoozing through a piece of it because it's too long. It's too long. That's the only thing I don't like about it. For a 30s musical, I found it very natural for a 30s musical because the vibrato and the overacting and the, oh, Charlie, I don't know what to do. Like, it didn't have any of that garbage. So I really enjoyed it. I love Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. I think this is what they do best. I think Irene Dunne is gorgeous. I think she has a beautiful voice. Despite her vibrato, I still enjoyed her. And for what a doofus Randall Scott is, he's great looking and he serves the function of just all-American pie. I think the storyline's not as thin as a typical 30s musical. In general, if you like old musicals, this would be at the top of my list of one to watch. If you don't like musicals or old musicals, this will have all the things that you don't like and don't watch it.
I also am going to give it a good review. I enjoyed it. I have a hard time with musicals that throw musical scenes in for no reason. I don't think this movie did that at all. I enjoyed the musical sequences. I pretty much, I would give it, I don't know, 3.5 stars, I think, for Fred and Ginger, basically. Irene Dunne was also great. I did not like Randolph Scott, but you're right. For what his role was supposed to be, the just sort of wholesome, all-American guy, he did it. He did it well. It was a little drawn out, but overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It's okay. Fred and Ginger are very fun to watch. Obviously, if repeating what you said, if you've seen Fred and Ginger or you like musicals, this is a must-see. You should watch all the Fred and Gingers. If you don't like musicals, however, this can be painful. The plot is thin. Randolph Scott is a block of wood, but it's almost painful to watch. The music is good. I thought Irene Dunne they needed a star, a headliner. I thought her character had really nothing interesting to do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because Irene Dunne did make some great comedies in the 30s. You could have pulled anybody to do this, because she really doesn't have a lot of comedic stuff to do. She's just there.
She does get to show off her pipes, though.
She gets to sing. 2 out of 4. It's all right. It's worth a watch. If you like musicals, if you like Fred and Ginger. If you don't, though, yeah, you would find this to be torture. Next time, we're going to let Tony pick. So, Tony, in a good loud voice, tell us, what is it we're going to see next time?
The Uninvited!
The Uninvited from 1944, I believe, starring Ray Milland. So join us next time. Tony likes his supernatural horror films. We're going to watch The Uninvited.
Tried to warn them. Now it is too late. The heart is free.